6 months of peace can lull a man into forgetting how swiftly everything can descend into blood and ashes. Tobias Hartwell rediscovered this harsh truth when a dust cloud materialized on the eastern ridge. 5 riders, their horses lathered and straining, their intent etched in the ruthless urgency with which they spurred their mounts across his land. He was repairing fence posts by the creek when Chief Takakota's grandfather's war lance, resting against his porch from its morning cleaning and feather airing, caught his eye. A sight that should have filled him with pride, the only white man in the territory to bear such an Apache honor, instead sent shards of ice through his veins. These riders were not coming for a social call. Tobias dropped his hammer and reached for the rifle he'd begun carrying again the previous week. Ever since Deputy Bradley mentioned the whispers circulating in town, rumors about strangers making inquiries, strangers curious about the rancher who had aided an Indian in evading justice, strangers who seemed unconvinced by the official explanation surrounding Marshal Webb's corruption trial. The lead rider was a stranger, tall and gaunt, possessing pale, unsettling eyes that hinted at a natural affinity for violence. However, it was the object slung across his saddle that truly chilled Tobias's blood. A blood-soaked Apache headband, the crimson still glistening. The man halted his horse 20 feet from the porch, close enough for Tobias to see the cruel amusement playing on his chapped lips, close enough to hear the ominous clicks of 5 weapons being simultaneously cocked. "You Tobias Hartwell?" the stranger drawled, his tone indicating he already knew the answer. "Depends on who's asking." The man's grin widened, exposing tobacco-stained teeth. "Name's Clayton Morrison. Colonel Morrison was my brother." He brandished the bloodied headband like a trophy. "And this? This belonged to your Apache friend, the one who murdered him." Tobias felt the world tilt on its axis. Ayanna had departed 3 days prior on a delicate diplomatic mission to the Southern Territories. He was expected to return tomorrow, bearing news regarding the extension of the peace treaty. He was supposed to be safe, under the protection of federal marshals, a government escort. But that headband screamed a different narrative, a story written in blood and betrayal. "Where is he?" Tobias demanded, unsure if he truly wanted to know. Clayton's eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "Somewhere you'll never find him. Unless, of course, you're willing to negotiate." The words hung heavy in the air, like a prelude to a death sentence. Tobias felt his heart pound against his ribs as the implications sunk in. These men weren't here merely for revenge. They wanted something far more sinister. They were here to finish what Marshal Webb had begun, and they were using Ayanna as leverage. But Clayton Morrison's next revelation shattered everything Tobias believed about justice, brotherhood, and the cost of taking sides in a conflict that was supposedly over. "The terms are simple," Clayton continued, dismounting with the nonchalant air of a man holding all the power. "You assassinated my brother's character, destroyed his legacy, made him look like a corrupt fool before the entire territory." Tobias gripped his rifle tighter. Though facing 5 drawn guns, it felt about as useful as a damp matchstick. "Your brother was corrupt. The evidence proved it." "Evidence fabricated by a lying savage," Clayton spat, his voice laced with venom. "Evidence that conveniently surfaced after Morrison was dead, incapable of defending himself." His pale eyes burned with hatred, a hatred that had festered and grown for months. "But I'm a fair man. I'll afford you the opportunity to make amends." One of Clayton's henchmen, a burly thug sporting a jagged scar from his left ear to his jaw, leaned forward in his saddle. "Just say the word, Clay. We can end this right here, right now." "Patience, Tucker," Clayton replied, his gaze never wavering from Tobias. "Mr. Hartwell needs to fully comprehend his options first." He reached into his saddlebag and produced a folded piece of paper. "This is a confession, pre-written. All it requires is your signature. It states that you manufactured the evidence against my brother, that you conspired with the Apache to frame an innocent officer, that everything Webb confessed to was a lie, extracted under duress." Tobias felt a wave of nausea. "And if I sign this, your Indian friend lives? We all walk away, and this entire ugly affair is forgotten?" Clayton's smile morphed into a predatory leer. "Of course, signing it also constitutes admitting to treason, a federal crime, a hanging offense. But hey, at least you'll die knowing you did the right thing. For us, that is." The confession fluttered in the twilight breeze, resembling a death warrant. Tobias could see the trap laid bare. Sign the paper, exonerate Morrison, but condemn himself and potentially reignite the war between settlers and the Apache. Refuse to sign and watch Ayanna die for exposing corruption. How do I know he's even still alive? Tobias challenged. Tucker reached into his coat and produced an item that made Tobias's knees buckle. A leather cord adorned with 3 Apache prayer beads, the very cord Ayanna wore around his neck. The beads his mother gifted him before she passed. He was alive when we took this, Tucker stated with undisguised glee. Whether he remains that way depends entirely on your cooperation. Tobias recalled his last conversation with Ayanna 3 days ago. The Apache warrior had been filled with hope regarding the southern negotiations, optimistic that peace could extend beyond their small corner of the territory. He had clasped Tobias's hand, calling him brother, promising to return with good news. Now he was in the hands of killers, possibly bleeding, possibly dying, while Tobias stood helplessly in his own yard, facing a gun pointed directly at his chest. "You have 1 hour to decide," Clayton announced, remounting his horse. "We'll be waiting at Devil's Canyon. Come alone. Bring the signed confession, and your friend lives to see another sunrise. Bring anyone else, attempt any trickery, and we'll send you his scalp, piece by piece." The 5 riders spun their horses and galloped away, leaving Tobias alone, burdened by an impossible choice. Save Ayanna and damn himself, or protect the truth and condemn his brother to death. But as he stood there watching the dust settle, Tobias remembered a lesson Chief Takakota had imparted 6 months earlier, a lesson about how the greatest warriors weren't those who won battles, but those who found ways to win without fighting. Suddenly, he knew precisely what he had to do. Even if it meant walking directly into hell, armed with only his grandfather's old Colt and a desperate scheme that would either save them both or result in their demise. Tobias rode hard toward town, the war lance secured to his saddle, his mind racing faster than his horse's hooves. Devil's Canyon was a perfect killing ground, a narrow entrance, towering walls, no escape routes. Clayton Morrison wasn't planning a prisoner exchange. He was orchestrating an execution, but Tobias possessed one advantage the killers were unaware of. During his 6 months as an adopted Apache, he had learned their signal system, the same system that had summoned 50 warriors to his ranch the day Webb attempted to murder Ayanna. The challenge was time. 1 hour to reach town, locate Deputy Bradley, persuade him to assist, and somehow alert the Apache without igniting a war that would obliterate everything they had accomplished. Main Street was nearly deserted when he thundered into town, a plume of dust billowing behind him like an approaching storm. The few onlookers who witnessed him riding with an Apache war lance quickly stepped aside, their faces reflecting the familiar mixture of respect and apprehension they had displayed for months. Tobias had become a legend in the territory. The white man who had brokered peace with the Apache, who had exposed corruption within the territorial government, who carried the honor of 2 peoples. But legends, he was learning, also made excellent targets. He found Bradley at the sheriff's office, hunched over a stack of wanted posters. The young man had matured into his authority over the past 6 months, but his face still lit up with the eager loyalty of someone who had chosen the right side of history. "Tobias," Bradley said, standing and extending his hand. "Didn't expect to see you in town today. How's the ranch holding up?" "They've got Ayanna," Tobias stated bluntly. "Clayton Morrison and 4 men. They want me to sign a confession claiming I fabricated the evidence against his brother." Bradley's face paled. "Morrison has a brother?" "Had," Tobias corrected. "And now he wants revenge. They're holding Ayanna at Devil's Canyon, giving me 1 hour to choose between saving my friend and destroying everything we've built." The deputy's hand instinctively moved towards his weapon. "We'll get Sheriff Mackenzie, round up a posse. No time," Tobias interrupted. "And it's too dangerous. If they see any riders approaching, they'll kill Ayanna before we get within shooting distance." He paused, studying Bradley's face. "But there is another way." "No," Bradley leaned forward, listening intently. "What do you need?" Tobias pulled out a piece of paper and began scribbling furiously. "Take this to Miguel Santos at the trading post. Tell him it's from Brother Wolf. He'll know what that means. Ask him to get word to Chief Takakota immediately." "What does it say?" that the White Brother needs assistance, that enemies have captured the peace speaker, that if they want to prevent war, they need to act quickly. Tobias folded the paper and pressed it into Bradley's hand. "Can you do this?" Bradley nodded grimly. "What about you?" "I'm going to Devil's Canyon alone, as they requested." Tobias checked his Colt, ensuring all 6 chambers were loaded. "But I won't be signing any confessions." "Tobias, this is suicide. 5 against 1 in a canyon with no escape routes." "Maybe," Tobias replied, swinging back into his saddle. "But Ayana risked his life to preserve the peace between our peoples. I can't do any less for him." As he rode out of town, Tobias felt the weight of the war lance against his leg. Chief Takakoto's grandfather had carried this weapon into countless battles, had used it to defend his people against overwhelming odds. Now it was Tobias's turn to discover what kind of warrior he truly was. But what awaited him at Devil's Canyon would test more than his courage. It would force him to choose between the life of his brother and the future of 2 entire peoples. Devil's Canyon lived up to its ominous name. The narrow passage between towering red rock walls appeared as if the earth had been cleaved open by an enraged god, leaving behind a scar that would never fully heal. Tobias approached cautiously, every instinct screaming danger, the war lance heavy in his grip. The silence was unnerving. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the hollow echo of his horse's hooves against the stone. Even the animals sensed that this place reeked of death. Clayton Morrison's voice echoed off the canyon walls before Tobias spotted him. "Right on time, Hartwell. I was beginning to think you didn't value your Apache friend." They had positioned themselves with cold calculation. Clayton stood on a ledge 20 feet up the canyon wall, his rifle trained downwards. Tucker and 2 other men crouched behind boulders at the canyon's mouth, effectively blocking any retreat. The 5th man was nowhere in sight, meaning he was either watching from above or guarding Ayana. "Where is he?" Tobias called out, his voice betraying none of the fear churning within him. "Safe," Clayton replied, "for now. Did you bring the confession?" Tobias reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Not the confession Clayton craved, but a letter he had hastily scribbled before leaving town, a letter that would reveal the truth of what transpired here, regardless of the outcome. "Show me Ayana first." Clayton gestured to someone out of Tobias's view. A moment later, the 5th man appeared on the opposite ledge, dragging a bound figure into view. Even from this distance, Tobias could see the blood matting Ayana's dark hair, the way he slumped against his captor, barely conscious. But he was alive. That was something. "Satisfied?" Clayton asked. "Now toss up that confession, and we can conclude this in a civilized manner. Or," a new voice boomed from the canyon entrance, "you can all drop your weapons and surrender peacefully." Everyone whirled toward the sound. Deputy Bradley stood silhouetted against the fading light, his badge glinting, his rifle aimed at Tucker's back. Clayton's face contorted with rage. "I told you to come alone!" "He did," Bradley called back. "I followed him on my own accord. I'm tired of criminals believing they can operate freely in my territory." Tobias felt his heart plummet. Bradley meant well, but his presence had transformed a perilous situation into a death trap. Now Clayton had no incentive to keep Ayana alive, and the canyon would become a slaughterhouse for all of them. "You stupid boy!" Clayton snarled, swinging his rifle toward Bradley. "You've just condemned them both." That's when an arrow sprouted from the stock of Clayton's rifle, splintering the wood and sending the weapon flying from his grasp. Simultaneously, another arrow found its mark in the shoulder of the man holding Ayana, causing him to release his prisoner and stumble backward. Apache warriors materialized on the canyon rim as if conjured from the stone itself. Not 50 this time, only 6, but strategically positioned with clear shots on every one of Clayton's men. Chief Takakota's voice echoed in English, carrying the weight of countless generations. "Clayton Morrison, you have violated the peace treaty by attacking an Apache diplomat under federal protection. Surrender now and face white man's justice. Resist and face ours." Clayton looked around frantically, finally comprehending that he had been outmaneuvered. The hunter had become the hunted. The trap had become a cage, and his carefully orchestrated revenge was collapsing around him like a house of cards. But desperate men don't surrender easily. Tucker raised his pistol toward Bradley, his scarred face a mask of murderous rage. Two other gunmen swung their weapons toward the Apache positions. The man who had been guarding Ayanna drew a knife and pressed it to the wounded warrior's throat. And in that instant, Tobias realized that all their careful planning, all their tactical advantages, all their righteous intentions would be rendered meaningless if everyone began firing at once. If you were Tobias, what would you do? Risk everything on a desperate charge to save Ayanna, or trust the Apache warriors to handle this without getting his friend killed? Tobias made his choice in the split second between heartbeats. Not a charge, not a retreat, but something he had learned from the warriors of both cultures. Sometimes the most potent weapon is a word spoken at the precise moment. "Tucker," he shouted, his voice resonating with the authority of a man who had stared into the abyss and lived to recount it. "Look around you. Really look. 6 Apache warriors with clear shots, a federal deputy with legal authority, and one rancher who has nothing left to lose." Tucker's pistol wavered, the first hint of doubt appearing on his scarred face. "You kill that deputy. You're not just fighting me," Tobias continued, his eyes locked on the man with the knife at Ayanna's throat. "You're fighting the United States government. You kill that Apache diplomat, you're not just breaking the law, you're starting a war that will consume this territory from here to Santa Fe." Clayton spat blood, having bitten his tongue when the arrow shattered his rifle. "Eloquent words, Hartwell, but we're past the point of negotiation." "Are we?" Tobias asked slowly, reaching for the war lance secured to his saddle. "Because I suspect you haven't heard the totality of my terms." The movement caused every weapon in the canyon to swivel towards him, but Tobias pressed on with deliberate calm. "You see, I penned a letter before coming here. Deputy Bradley has a copy. Miguel Santos at the trading post has one too, as does Chief Takakota." He lifted the lance, its eagle feathers catching the last rays of the setting sun. "That letter details everything: who you are, what you wanted, how you kidnapped a federal diplomat to extort a false confession." Clayton's face drained of color. "You're bluffing. That letter is already en route to the territorial governor, the federal marshal's office, and the newspaper in Santa Fe," Tobias said with a grim smile. "Even if you slaughter all of us right here, right now, by tomorrow morning, the entire territory will know precisely what Clayton Morrison and his men attempted to do." The man holding the knife to Ayanna's throat glanced nervously at his boss. "Clay, maybe we should—" "Shut up!" Clayton snarled, but Tobias could see the fear creeping into his pale eyes. The carefully constructed plan was unraveling. The perfect revenge was transforming into a public spectacle. "Here's what's going to transpire," Tobias continued, raising the war lance higher. "You're going to release Ayanna. You're going to ride out of this canyon and keep riding until you're beyond the borders of this territory. And you're going to pray that Chief Takakota's mercy extends further than mine does." "And if we don't?" Chief Takakota's voice thundered from the canyon rim, speaking in Apache. The ancient language echoed off the stone walls, ancient and implacable. When he finished, he translated for the white men below. He said, "The choice is yours. Justice under the white man's law or justice under Apache law, but justice will be served." Just then, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Not Apache ponies this time. Iron shoes on stone, moving fast. Sounds like federal cavalry coming in hot. Bradley smiled grimly. "I sent word to Fort Richardson before following you. Figured they'd want to be aware of a threat against a federal diplomat." Clayton Morrison's carefully calculated revenge had devolved into utter catastrophe. Surrounded by enemies, his crimes meticulously documented, federal troops closing in, and his brother's reputation poised to be dragged through the mud once more in the territorial newspapers. But cornered animals are at their most dangerous, and what Clayton did next would prove that when men have nothing left to lose, they're willing to drag everyone down with them. Clayton Morrison's laughter was the sound of a man's sanity shattering. It echoed off the canyon walls like the cry of a wounded animal, desperate and dangerous, utterly beyond reason. "You think this is over?" he shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. "You think you've won? My brother was worth 10 of your savage friends, and I'll be damned if I let him be remembered as a traitor." He drew a hidden pistol from his boot with lightning speed, aiming not at Tobias, not at Bradley, not even at the Apache warriors above. Instead, he pointed it directly at the man holding Ayanna, his own ally, the one person keeping the diplomat alive. "Bobby!" he screamed to the knife-wielding killer. "You cut that Indian's throat right now, or I'll put a bullet in your spine!" The threat was insane, suicidal, the act of a man who had lost all touch with reality. But that made it all the more dangerous. Bobby's eyes widened in terror as he realized his boss had completely lost his mind. "Clay, what are you—" "Do it!" Clayton shrieked, cocking the pistol. "Kill him! Kill him! And then let them try to prove my brother was corrupt without their star witness!" Tobias felt time slow to a crawl, the sensation that always accompanied moments where life and death teetered on a razor's edge. He could see Bobby's hand trembling on the knife, the madness burning in Clayton's eyes, and hear the approaching cavalry growing closer, but not close enough. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything that followed. Tobias hefted the war lance, feeling its perfect balance, remembering every lesson Chief Takakota had taught him about honor, sacrifice, and the price of protecting what mattered most. The weapon had been carried into battle by generations of Apache warriors, had tasted the blood of enemies and protectors alike. Now, it would taste blood again. He hurled the lance with every fiber of his being, putting behind it not just his arm, but his heart, his soul, his unwavering determination that Ayanna would not die in that god-forsaken canyon. The weapon soared through the air like a bolt of lightning, its eagle feathers streaming behind it, its iron point gleaming with deadly purpose. It struck Bobby square in the chest, just as his knife began to move towards Ayanna's throat. The impact drove him backward off the ledge, the blade spinning harmlessly away, his scream cut short by the crack of bone on stone 20 feet below. But Clayton's pistol was already swinging toward Tobias, murder blazing in his pale eyes. "You killed my last chance, you Apache-loving bastard! Now I'll kill you!" The shot rang out like a thunderclap in the confined space of the canyon. But it wasn't Clayton's gun that fired. Deputy Bradley had put a bullet through Clayton Morrison's heart before the madman could complete his turn. The corrupt revenge-seeker dropped like a stone, his unfired pistol clattering across the canyon floor. Silence fell over Devil's Canyon, thick and heavy. The remaining 2 gunmen threw down their weapons and raised their hands, clearly wanting no part of their dead leader's descent into madness. Chief Takakota's warriors descended swiftly to secure Ayanna, while the thunder of cavalry horses grew ever louder. Tobias walked slowly to where his war lance had fallen, pulling it free from Bobby's lifeless body. The ancient weapon was unmarked, ready to serve again if needed. But he hoped, with all his heart, that its fighting days were finally over. Ayanna, supported by 2 Apache warriors, managed a weak smile. "Brother Wolf comes when called," he said in Apache, using the name the tribe had bestowed upon Tobias. "Like always, family protects family," Tobias replied in the same language, words Chief Takakota had taught him 6 months prior. As federal cavalry poured into the canyon to clean up the aftermath, Tobias realized that something profound had transpired here. Not just the defeat of criminals or the rescue of a friend, but proof that the peace they had fought so hard to build was stronger than the hatred that sought to dismantle it. However, the victory had come at a cost that would reverberate throughout the territory for years to come, and what unfolded next would determine whether justice had truly prevailed, or if they had merely won a single battle in a war that would never truly end. The federal investigation that followed the events at Devil's Canyon lasted 3 weeks, unearthing evidence that shocked even the most hardened officials in the territorial government. Clayton Morrison hadn't been acting alone. He had been bankrolled by a network of war profiteers who had amassed fortunes by supplying weapons to both sides of the Apache conflicts. Captain William Hayes, the federal marshal who spearheaded the investigation, found Tobias at his ranch on a crisp morning in late October. The officer's face bore the weary expression of a man who had witnessed too much corruption in too many places. "We uncovered Morrison's financial records," Hayes said, accepting a cup of coffee on Tobias's porch. Payments from arms dealers in Chicago, gun manufacturers in Connecticut, and even ammunition suppliers as far away as Baltimore. Your friend's kidnapping was just the tip of the iceberg. Tobias sat down, the coffee cup feeling cold in his hands, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The tip of what? They were orchestrating the resurgence of the Apache Wars, Hayes replied gravely. Not just here, but throughout the Southwest. Morrison's objective was to eliminate Ayanna and frame the Apache for attacking federal diplomats. This would have provided the army with the justification to abrogate all treaties and force the tribes onto reservations. The scope of the conspiracy is staggering. Dozens of men in positions of power, all colluding to profit from human suffering on an unimaginable scale. If Clayton Morrison had succeeded at Devil's Canyon, thousands would have perished in the wars that would have followed. What happens now? Tobias asked. Now we finish what you initiated 6 months ago, Hayes stated. Every name, every payment, every corrupt official will be exposed. The territorial governor has already called for a thorough investigation of the Marshal Service. Deputy Bradley has been promoted to interim sheriff with full federal backing. But the most significant revelation came at the end of their conversation. There's one more thing, Hayes said, reaching into his coat. President Taylor himself signed this. The document was printed on official White House stationery, heavy paper that carried the weight of federal authority. As Tobias read, his hands trembled. It was a presidential commendation recognizing his extraordinary service in preserving peace between the United States government and the Apache Nation. Furthermore, it formally acknowledged his adoption into the Apache tribe and granted him the status of official mediator between the two peoples. You're being offered a position, Hayes explained. Federal Indian agent for the entire Southwest Territory. You'll report directly to Washington and collaborate with tribal leaders to expand the peace treaties, ensuring that this type of conspiracy never happens again. Tobias stared at the document, barely comprehending what he was reading. 6 months ago, he had been a simple rancher who had offered water to a thirsty stranger. Now the President of the United States was entrusting him with shaping the future of an entire region. There's just one condition, Hayes added with a faint smile. Chief Takakota must approve the appointment. The government wants to ensure that you have the full support of the tribes. As if summoned by their discussion, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the ranch. But these weren't the desperate hoofbeats of men riding in anger or fear. These were the deliberate steps of a ceremonial procession. Chief Takakota led a group of 20 Apache elders, all adorned in their finest regalia. Behind them came Ayanna, fully recovered from his ordeal, carrying something that made Tobias's breath catch in his throat. A second war lance, identical to the one he already possessed, but newer, unmarked by battle. The chief dismounted slowly, his ancient eyes filled with what appeared to be pride. "Brother Wolf," he said in flawless English, "we have come to deliberate your future." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Captain Hayes had ever witnessed. The Apache elders formed a circle around Tobias, each speaking in turn about what they had observed, what they had learned, and what they believed about this white man who had consistently chosen honor over self-preservation. Chief Takakota spoke last, his words carrying the weight of decades of leadership and wisdom. 6 months ago, we entrusted you with the lance of a warrior. Today, we offer you the lance of a peace chief. Accept it, and you will become more than a brother to our people. You will become the guardian of the treaty that safeguards all our children. The second war lance was a masterpiece of Apache craftsmanship. The shaft was carved with symbols representing both cultures. Eagle feathers intertwined with olive branches, Apache prayers inscribed alongside words in English. At its tip was etched a single word in both languages, peace. But understand, Chief Takakota continued, this honor comes with great responsibility. If you accept the white man's position, you must also embrace our traditions. You will speak for both peoples. You will carry the burdens of both peoples. And when the time comes, you will sacrifice for both peoples. Tobias scanned the circle of weathered faces, seeing decades of suffering and survival, wisdom gained through loss, and hope maintained against impossible odds. These people had entrusted him with their most sacred honor, risked everything to help him save Ayanna, and chosen peace over vengeance, even when vengeance would have been easier. "I accept," he said simply. A celebration ensued that lasted until the stars filled the night sky. Apache and white men shared food, stories, and hopes for a future where their children could grow up without fear. Deputy Bradley arrived with news that the last of the arms dealers had been apprehended in Chicago. Sheriff McKenzie brought word that the territorial legislature was drafting new laws to prevent corruption within the Marshal Service. But the most poignant moment occurred when Ayanna presented Tobias with a gift from the Apache children. A drawing depicting two figures standing side by side under a radiant sun, one carrying a war lance, the other an olive branch, both protecting a group of small figures representing all the children of the territory. "They drew this," Ayanna explained, "to illustrate their vision of the world, a place where warriors fight for peace, not for war." As the evening drew to a close and the Apache prepared to return to their village, Chief Takakota pulled Tobias aside for a private word. "The white government will test you," he warned. "They will pressure you to prioritize their interests over ours. And our people will test you too. They will observe to see if power alters who you are." "And if I fail?" The old chief smiled. "You gave water to a dying enemy when it would have been safer to let him perish. You risked everything to save one man when you could have saved yourself. You threw your grandfather's lance to protect a brother when bullets would have been easier." He clasped Tobias's shoulder. "Men who make such choices do not fail. They simply find new ways to prevail." 2 years later, the Southwest Territory had evolved into a shining example of peaceful coexistence between settlers and native tribes. The peace treaties had been expanded to encompass 17 different Apache bands, 3 Navajo clans, and 4 Pueblo communities. Trade routes were secure, children attended integrated schools, and the territorial government had implemented the most stringent anti-corruption laws in the United States. Tobias Hartwell, federal Indian agent and Apache peace chief, divided his time between meetings in Washington and tribal councils, always carrying 2 war lances, one for war when necessary, one for peace whenever possible. He married a schoolteacher named Sarah, who shared his vision of a better world, and together they raised 3 children who were fluent in both English and Apache. Deputy Bradley became Sheriff Bradley, then Judge Bradley, and eventually Territorial Congressman Bradley, carrying forward the lessons he had learned about courage and justice. The Apache continued to prosper on their expanded reservation lands while also actively participating in the burgeoning territorial economy. And every year, on the anniversary of that first day when a thirsty stranger had stumbled into his life, Tobias would return to the old well on his ranch and remember how everything had been transformed by a single cup of water. Because in the end, that's how the world truly changes. Not through grand gestures or mighty battles, but through small acts of decency that ripple outward, like stones cast into still water, creating waves that eventually reach shores you never imagined touching. So, as we've seen, Tobias's story is a powerful reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage, compassion, and a commitment to peace can triumph. It's about choosing understanding over hate, unity over division, and fighting for what's right, even when it means risking everything. It highlights how small acts of kindness and a willingness to listen can bridge divides and build a better future for everyone. What did you think of Tobias's choices? What would you have done in his situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to share your opinions, ask questions, or just join the conversation. And if you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit, be sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss out on our upcoming videos. Thanks for watching.